This is an interesting point on page 57. So he's getting older now, and he's working in a publishing house. And his father is writing an article for it's called the Westminster Review. And John Stuart Mill makes this point or observation about writing for the public versus books in terms of how long it takes for them to be successful. He says, so this is about his father's article. His father began by an analysis of the tendencies of periodical literature in general, pointing out that it cannot, like books, wait for success, but must succeed immediately, or not at all, and is hence almost certain to profess and inculcate the opinions already held by the public to which it addresses itself, instead of attempting to rectify or improve those opinions. So he's saying that magazine articles, for example, newspaper articles, any very quick media like TV, even I guess you could even say stuff on TV and the news, their lifespan is days, maybe longer now with the internet, but their lifespan is essentially days. They have to, whatever they say in those magazine articles or newspaper or TV, whatever they say has to be already 90% old. They have to, whatever they say has to be almost entirely in the experience and in the acceptance of the audience. Only a small part of it, they can only really tweak ideas. But a book, you can write a book about something brand new, and something like that can sit on the shelf, but be picked up once in a while, and can start to influence people's minds, in some cases a generation in the future. Books have a lot longer lifespan, and thus can deal with much more strange and perhaps futuristic or brand new ideas than the quick media like newspapers and magazines and the TV. I guess also on that same point, because it seems to be quite true, that if you look at what is directed at, what is written about, and how it's written about in quick media versus long media, maybe you could put it that way, there is this kind of partisanship or very common-placed views that come out of those quick medias versus books you can find ideas about everything in. Also consider that people who are engaging in quick media, that's a career, that's a full-time job, and they have to be able to sell it, and the only way to sell it is to write articles and etc. that are acceptable to your readership. But a book needs no career man. A book is written, and once it's written, it's out there. It sits. It's not recycled immediately like a newspaper or a magazine, or even the TV's constant spin of material. A book lasts a long time and doesn't need necessarily to be fueling a full-time job. A magazine does many full-time jobs. A newspaper also fuels many full-time jobs. But a book doesn't need to do that. And so it can have the kinds of material that takes far longer to absorb. Another great point, again, he's talking about his father for the most part here. On page 65, he's talking about democracy, he's talking a bit about politics now. And he says his father, he says, a democratic suffrage, the principal article of his political creed. Not on the ground of liberty, rights of man, which was Thomas Paine's book, or any of the phrases more or less significant by which up to that time democracy had usually been defended. But So this is how we defend democracy. As the most essential of securities for good government. So that's a very different view. That's an interesting view. We normally think about, we establish a nation that secures our rights as citizens. And if you want to talk about the U.S. Constitution was meant to do that. But actually, the U.S. Constitution was more about constraints on government. The Bill of Rights is supposed to talk about rights of the people. But the Constitution, there's ways of doing this. There's a democracy, there's a kind of political organization to protect individual citizens. And there's also the consideration of the political documents or political framework that defines the duties and the limits of a government. There's two separate problems there, right? There's the problem of what are my rights as a citizen, and there's the problem of what are the duties and the limits of the government. And those two things are often at odds. That if you give me liberties, it necessarily restrains the government. As the citizens have liberty, the governments have less power. As the governments have more power, the citizens have less liberties. And that, I think, is across the board true. And I don't see any solution to that problem. But it's interesting to see that espoused here by John Stuart Mill's father, who says that no, democratic suffrage, everyone thinks it's about human rights. Even today in Canada, that's what you hear of a democracy. It's really an attack. Democracy is for the citizens. And any attack on democracy is an attack on citizens. But there's also the consideration of a certain kind of government as a way of restraining those in government. And that is talked about a lot less. I really wish in political debates they talked more about political philosophy and the role of government. I would love to find, it's rare to find a politician who would answer the question, what is the proper role of government? And even if they do, it's often very vague language. But that's the point of constitutions. They're to chain the hands of people in power. And as a result, protect the rights and the freedom of movement, freedom of speech and all that of the citizens. So it's nice to see that espoused here, that is important, because we always just hear about human rights or what are my rights as a Canadian citizen or whatever it is. We don't often hear about what limits should we impose on the government. I think it's very rare to see that, very rare conversation topic. Usually the conversation topics are about citizen rights. On page 67, he discusses reason versus feelings, and I think it's important. So again, this is about what his father thinks. It was, my father's teachings tended to be undervaluing of feeling. It was not that he was himself cold-hearted or insensible. I believe it was rather from the contrary quality. He thought that feeling could take care of itself, that there was sure to be enough of it if actions were properly cared about. Offended by the frequency with which, in ethical and philosophical controversy, feeling is made the ultimate reason and justification of conduct, instead of being itself called on for justification, while in practice, actions, the effect of which on human happiness is mischievous, are defended as being required by feeling, and the character of a person of feeling obtains a credit for desert, which he thought only due to actions. He had a real impatience for attributing praise to feeling, or of any but the most sparing reference to it, either in the estimation of persons or in the discussion of things. So he's saying that often he hated to hear the emotion or feeling as a justification of action, or even the proof of an idea based on some consideration of feelings or emotions. He thought actually what should be the case is that if you evoke an emotion as your argument, Justify that. Why is that the reason for your idea, whatever it might be? So something like let's say pro-life versus pro-choice. It's horrible to have abortions and kill fetuses. It just makes me cringe, or it makes me feel bad. John Stuart Mill's father would say, why is that emotion the argument for pro-life versus pro-choice? Is that the proper basis to have discussions? What about a person who is committed of the crime of mass murder, and the parents of the victims want this guy's head? They want him dead. They think he killed their kids or whatever it is. Do their feelings trump his life? So John Stuart, or his father, is saying that no, feelings should not be part of this. That reason should be part, and that is our best case to make a justification for ideas, both in philosophy and other areas of human inquiry and human decision making. And it also speaks to the power of emotions over, I think, in a lot of cases, the thoughts of the ideas and the positions of people today. How powerful advertising can be on people's behaviors, and how cowed people can be at a manipulator, a mass manipulator, who will use people's emotions to manipulate them and to make them do certain things or make them feel a certain way. Especially in politics, it's very easy to find people. I don't know if it's a character's trait. I would call it a character flaw, but that may be kind of rude to say. But there's so many people who are so afraid of having a position that they tend to have a middle-of-the-road position, because they don't really want an intellectual, they don't want a position in which they have to defend. They want a position in which they feel safe, in which they can feel like a sheep and be in a mass, because then they don't have to have an intellectual discussion about politics or whatever it is. They can simply say, well, everyone else has this middle-of-the-road position, so I'm okay there. You can't attack me for that. And if they get attacked, then, of course, all they have as recourse is just, well, you're being mean, or it's just emotions that are used. So I guess that I also just see that it's so widespread and ubiquitous that emotions are so targeted. Like, look at any political ad, all kinds of the attack ads that come out during near elections that say, oh, this person wants to raise your taxes, and oh, this person's doesn't care about climate change. Or there's always a tone of bad and evil during attack ads. And I hate it because, first of all, it insults my intelligence, but it also makes me think that the rest of the public, that works, that kind of emotional triggering, even movies, that emotional triggering and manipulation works. And I fear for my fellow man that it works, because I would rather have people come to their positions and opinions through reason and not through emotion, because emotion is so easily manipulated, and so easily can you use that to control people's thoughts and behaviors. And it's just not right to do that to people that are capable of free thought. And ultimately, those kinds of people are also easily manipulated into other positions. People who change their minds so often will continue to change their minds so often, and if they don't hold their views for the right reasons or for good solid reasons, they will soon hold different views. And such a unstable and disloyal citizenry would seem to me to be a national security hazard, something like that. On page 83, this is a fantastic way of putting the importance of careful thought, careful reasoned thought. So I'll just read it. He says, "The very excellence of analysis is that it tends to weaken and undermine whatever is the result of prejudice. That it enables us mentally to separate ideas which have only casually clung together, and no associations whatever could ultimately resist this dissolving force. Were it not that we owe to analysis our clearest knowledge of the permanent sequences in nature, the real connections between things, not dependent on our will and feelings. I thought that's a great way of putting it. Prejudice comes out of tradition, and it comes out of just things are done because they're done. There's no thought in it. It's just how this works. It's how we're doing it. It's easy because it's comfortable. It's very familiar. But if we use what he calls the excellence of analysis, that will ground our ideas and associations in nature, in a mechanism, in fact, and that is better than the stumbling and the luck and the unreasoned positions that emerge out of the past, out of the unanalyzed past. This next part is, I'm not sure what to say about it, but I think it's worth reading. He said, this is again, I guess, more of a consequence or some reflecting on his father's education of him, and what a purely reasoned life may have done for him in a negative way. So this is on the bottom of page 83. All those to whom I looked up were of opinion that the pleasure of sympathy with human beings and the feelings which made the good of others, and especially of mankind on a large scale, the object of existence, were the greatest and surest sources of happiness. Of the truth of this I was convinced, but to know that a feeling would make me happy if I had it did not give me the feeling. My education, I thought, had failed to create these feelings in sufficient strength to resist the dissolving influence of analysis, while the whole course of my intellectual cultivation had made precocious and premature analysis the invertebrate habit of my mind. I was thus, as I said to myself, left stranded at the commencement of my voyage with a well-equipped ship and rudder, but no sail, without any desire for the ends which I had been so carefully fitted out to work for, no delight in virtue or the general good, but also just as little as anything else. So I'm not sure what to say about that, but he's saying that through using reason so early as a child, and logic, and what he calls the dissolving influence of analysis, he had little desire to do anything. He was reasoned out of both life. He was reasoned out of both the default existence of human beings being hedonists, like animals, simply being driven to do whatever feels good at the time. So he was educated out of that, so that wasn't going to happen. But he also took no delight in being a humanitarian. He was not. He took no pleasure or desire in helping the world, as opposed to just being selfish versus just being unselfish. Because he looked at the world through reason, he didn't really want to do anything, I guess, which is kind of odd. But anyways, I thought that was worth reading and maybe something to think about.